good morning, everyone. Greetings from Oxford, and thank you very much for joining us today for the 5th session of our Engaging with Evidence series. As always, it's fantastic to see participants joining us today from across the world and from across different sectors. My name is Tanya Hamid, and I'm a Research and Policy Associate at the Government Outcomes Lab, based here at the University of Oxford. I'm really excited to be here with you today and to be co-hosting this session with my colleague, Andrea. In today's session, we'll be focusing on social outcomes contracts in Europe. So we'll be looking at where and how these projects were developed, what some of the emerging learnings are, and also some considerations for those who are looking to develop social outcomes contracts themselves. For those of you who might be joining us for the first time today, here's a bit more about who we are. So at the Government Outcomes Lab, we're a research centre based at the University of Oxford within the Blavatnik School of Government. We were established back in 2016 as a partnership between UK government and the University of Oxford. And our focus is very much on applied and engaged research around the government's role in building cross-sector partnerships and also improving social outcomes. So while we are involved in a range of research and evaluation projects looking at outcomes-based commissioning, social impact bonds, and a range of related topics, we make sure we are actively disseminating this work and also sharing the best practice from across the sector. This also includes workshops, events, conferences, and online sessions such as this one today. And so this session is part of the wider Engaging with Evidence series. We launched the series back in January and designed it as an open platform for policymakers, practitioners, and researchers around the world to engage with key findings from the latest research and evaluation work in the field. So we start off usually with the distillation of key research findings, then we bring in some practical insights from practitioners across different sectors and fields, and all the while we try and have a very honest and constructive dialogue. And so for our previous sessions, we've looked at impact bonds in Latin America. We've also looked at development impact bonds across Asia and Africa, a pioneering project on maternal health in India, and also most recently, outcomes funds globally. You can find the recordings and slides from these sessions on our website, along with other knowledge resources. We do have one more session planned before we break for the summer. This will be on the 14th of June around 3:30 p.m. BST, where we'll be talking about resilience and recovery in the face of COVID-19. So instead of the initial adaptation phase, we'll be talking a bit more about rebuilding back better, particularly in the context of outcomes-based partnerships. And so we'll be bringing in latest research from the World Bank, as well as our own research from the Government Outcomes Lab. So please do sign up for the event on our website. And so coming back to today's session, we have 3 main parts to the discussion. So we'll be kicking off with an overview of the state of play for social outcomes contracts in EU member states. Then we will be moving on to looking at capacity building and support for public administrations exploring the use of social outcomes contracts, so people who might be thinking of developing these on their own. And then finally, we'll be moving on to a panel discussion around 3 core themes, and this will indeed be the sort of bulk of the session. So we'll be starting, if everyone could please keep themselves muted, that would be great. I'm just hearing a bit of echo. Great. Just for the panel discussion, we'll be starting off looking at some drivers for the use of social outcomes contracts in different national contexts. We'll also be looking at innovations and adaptations at the local level, and finally also looking at some key considerations for practical implementation. This would also be a great opportunity to hear from some of the practitioners who are joining us today, and they seem to be working in a range of countries across Europe, so including France, Spain, Portugal, Netherlands, Finland, and many more, and who are very grateful to have with us today. I'd also like to flag that we'll be focusing on projects in the EU countries today, and this is for a few different reasons. So firstly, we thought that including the UK would have skewed some of the results, as this is still, of course, a dominant market and has more than 89 projects. We also thought that the EU countries share more commonalities when it comes to procurement regulatory frameworks, to EU instruments and funds that they can use to actually pay for outcomes. Also, there's less data on some of the other non-EU countries, such as Russia. But we will be looking at impact bonds in other parts of Europe and indeed the world in our annual conference in September. So please do join us then for discussions on these other contexts. We also do assume at least some basic understanding of impact bonds models today. And so the emphasis will be very much on understanding how the model is being applied across Europe, as well as some practical considerations for those who are thinking of developing these themselves. We usually have a very engaged and interactive discussion, so please do keep dropping any questions or reflections into the chat, and we will pick these up throughout the session. Please do keep your cameras on if possible. It's always really great to see people's faces, but please do keep yourselves on mute unless you ask to contribute. We are recording this session and we will be uploading the recording onto our website shortly after. So before we get started, we did want to get to know you a bit better. We have lots of participants online today, so more than 70 already, and we're hoping more people will be joining us as we go on. So if everyone could just drop into the chat where they're joining us from today, so perhaps the city or the country, and also perhaps what you're hoping to get out of today's session. So did you have any particular burning questions or any particular things you're hoping to find out more about? Please do drop those in. And I see these coming in already. Some people joining us from France, Brussels, of course, Oxford, Switzerland, Northern Ireland, Copenhagen. Great, UAE, fantastic, USA, Scotland. It's more coming in. Fantastic, and also please feel free to drop in any particular questions that you might have today, or any particular learning objectives around joining us today. And as Andrea points out, it would be great to know which perspective you're bringing in. So are you perhaps already involved in developing impact bonds or implementing them somewhere? Would be great to hear about that as well. Great, so while those are coming in, I'm going to kick us off with the first part of our session. And for this part, I will be handing things over to Georgia to give us an overview of the EU social investment framework and also the related instruments. She's a specialist in social impact investment at the European Commission. So over to you, Georgia.
Hi, good morning, everyone. And it's a pleasure to be with you. Right, so today I would like to tell you about three things. First, what is the EU policy context in which social outcomes contracting in particular emerged and was supported as a policy area and a tool. Then I'll highlight what sets it apart and the way we're currently looking at social impact partnerships more broadly. And thirdly, I will mention some exciting new elements of what is on the EU horizon regarding social investments and support for social innovation in the new generation of programs. Thank you. So first off, EU policy on social outcomes contracting dates to 2015. And the first investment facilities developed were part of the social investment toolbox, which had access to microfinance and social enterprises as its two main pillars, stemming from the social business initiative of the Commission of 2011. And next to this EU-level instrument seeking to improve the supply of social finance, and working with the lens of developing the broader social economy, we saw social outcomes contracts as primarily a new way of organizing partnerships between the public sector and the social economy, and providing additional and flexible funding for social economy organizations. What also appealed, of course, was the focus on prevention and more effective longer-term solutions, and the stronger collaboration drive within governments and across sectors in the economy that the tool brings. We started developing the first tools in 2015. That was in Europe, a period of influx of refugees, so the big migration crisis. So in fact, in starting to think about the facility, we had migration and particular outcomes in mind, rather than more general support for social economy. Now, 6 years on, the new context and the new tools all support these elements, and the new generation of programs starting this year, namely under the European Social Fund Plus, have increased focus on social innovation and policy experimentation, and at the same time, looking at the broader context of economic recovery, EU's commitment to results-based finance and more generally is stronger than ever. And that is evidenced in the new Recovery and Resilience Facility, which is in essence a results-based tool. So you have changed to the next slide, which is thank you. The specific EU support tools for social outcomes contracts. They include complementary dedicated investment and advisory facilities. So first off, you see the investment facility was launched in 2016 under the investment plan for Europe. It was called the PBR facility and implemented by the EIF. It's part of a larger commitment to social impact investments under the FC, European Fund for Strategic Investments. And we have several landmark facilities, which are well known, I trust, by most of you. And we have some other approved, which are not on the list. So combine the commitment to social outcome contracts from the EU budget is at the moment at 25.9 million. And this is part of the 230 million invested towards social impact under the FC, the European Fund for Strategic Investments. And that's part of the a sort of 1 billion of EU resources flowing towards the social economy in the previous period. This is enhanced now in the resources committed in going forward from 2021 to 27. Now, we also have a hugely important advisory facility under EA, which Bruno will present later on. And as mentioned, both the investment and advisory facilities will be expanded under the new integrated InvestEU program, which is kicking in this year. Now, the next slide. I know we have the Commissioner Gentiloni praising some of the landmark transactions. You can read this later, but the next slide, please. Right, so why social outcomes contracts? I would like to share with you some of the new way we're starting to look at SOCs and the broader impact partnerships, and namely as tools for orchestrating social change. So now earlier like 5 years ago, which is our beginning, we departed from the rationale. We diverged from it, that SOC can be a new asset class, and instead really ask how it could become a tool for recalibrating investment strategies of member states, how it could help overcome the barriers to investments, like either the intertemporal trade-offs, the time lapse between investments and the visible returns and benefits, and the risk of failure entailed in innovation. And so how it can support the broader participatory re-engineering of public finance. This was on our mind from early on, but now turning towards more specific topics where we try to apply those tools, such as social inclusion, we're also taking the following perspectives. Could social outcomes contracts be an effective tool for orchestrating social ecosystem and activating virtual loops in the economy so that it works for all? So the EU is about to hold its high-level social economy summit next week, where part of the discussion will focus on this precisely, how social outcomes contracts can participate in broader social change, mainstreaming social economy to, well, the whole economy, rewiring economy. And Harvard scholar Julie Batilana has identified 3 roles that are needed in the process of social change. So if agitation is the process needed to bring an issue to the policy agenda, and innovation is needed to come up with new solutions to engage governments on, then orchestration is what is needed to move beyond the stage of isolated experimentation. And the orchestration work needs collaboration and engaging across sectors, governments, the business, civil society, social economy, as well as investors and consumers, just as are known to happen in social impact partnerships. And then from this perspective, also outcome funds are one of the levers to develop social investment ecosystems and to catalyze such partnerships, and ultimately lead to more systemic shifts. So I don't say more, you're invited to follow this conversation at the USIS next week. The session is called Partnering and Investment for Impact, and I hope this will be a continuation from today's discussion. Right, so last year already Commission highlighted the InvestEU program it will be a key for catalyzing new partnerships, business and finance models. So how is it going to look? My last slide, please. Right, so besides InvestEU, or within the InvestEU, which we will already combine and enhance the current social tools that I mentioned, and also importantly to allow to combine infrastructure and services with social enterprise support in projects so that we can support cohesive local development processes. Most excitingly, currently, we're working on a new generation of social innovation facility, which will blend EU and philanthropic resources and channel them in genuinely new impact areas, new for us, for the EU budget, like media diversity and social inclusion and civil society development and democracy. But as investments, as social impact investments. So this is pretty hot at the moment on our side. It will be unfolding over the next month. And then finally, the Commission has also started to do some direct impact piloting in selected member states that encourage cross-sectoral collaboration, that are finding new ways to use the EU budget for repayable and non-repayable support at once, that such blended support is needed for the novel approaches in access to housing for vulnerable persons. For instance, this is one of our pilots here. And importantly, under this action, we are going to pilot local seed outcome funds in the countries of implementation, Slovakia, Romania, and Bulgaria. So that will be hugely exciting. And that's it. In conclusion, we continue to experiment also in-house in policymaking and hope to support social innovation in the EU in the most adequate ways going forward because the times demand it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Georgia, for such a helpful overview and for taking us through some of those new initiatives. Next up, I'll have my colleagues Mara and Andrea take us through an overview of social outcomes contracts in EU member states. Mara is our director at the Government Outcomes Lab, and Andrea is our policy and engagement manager. So over to you both.
Great, awesome. Thank you so much, Tanya, and huge thanks to Georgia for joining us this morning and for also sticking to time. It's really exciting to hear about all the initiatives that the European Commission is currently working on. So I'm just going to kick off the next parts of the discussion. We do have a packed agenda, so I will keep it very brief. So in this next part, Mara and I will be sharing some updates, really an overview of the state of play with social outcome contracts in EU member states. Tanya has already explained why we're looking at EU member states specifically and not the rest of Europe. Just by means of context setting, there are a couple of other things that I wanted to specify. You might have already noticed on Georgia's slides that she mentioned social outcomes contracting, social impact bonds, outcome funds, and so on. So there's quite a wide degree of variation in terms of how words like or phrases like social impact bonds are used across Europe. For the purposes of this session, we're using social impact bonds and social outcome contracts interchangeably to really refer to an outcomes-based contract that incorporates the use of private funding from investors to cover that upfront capital that's required to get a program up and running. But we do recognize that in other countries, the terminology might be slightly different. If you're feeling a bit confused and you're wondering, oh, am I working on a SIB or a social impact contract? What's the difference? I would recommend that you head to our website. We've got a comprehensive glossary where we try to clarify some of these terms. And more excitingly, very recently, so literally yesterday, very hot off the press, we've published in partnership with the European Investment Bank an introductory guide to social outcome contracting in Europe. So in that guide, we've tried to bring together some of the current practice across different European Union member states. One final thing from me that I thought would be helpful to explain is why on earth is the Government Outcomes Lab based at Oxford University, primarily doing research on social impact bonds in the UK, hosting a session on SIBs or SOCs in Europe. And as far as I'm concerned, there are two key reasons. I'm sure others might have other reasons. One is that we think that even though the UK has been very much leading the way with social impact bonds over the past decade, there's so much interesting practice emerging across different European countries. We're seeing a lot of adaptation, a lot of flexing of the model, and really lots of interesting practice as well. And in the panel discussion, we'll hear from some of the leading practitioners in different European countries about how the SIB model is being adapted and adopted in their respective countries. The other reason why I was really keen that we host this session and we produce this guide is that very often, so in my role, I'm a policy and engagement manager at the Go Lab. So I spend a lot of my time talking to people really from all over the world about our insights, the work and research that we do. And we've been getting a lot of questions, a lot of requests for information from different organizations and different professionals across Europe. So I really felt like, despite Georgia's hard work and all the work that Bruno's team at the Social Outcome Contracting Advisory Platform, despite all the work that they've been doing, there's still a degree of maybe lack of clarity, lack of coordination, lack of maybe full awareness of the range of approaches, initiatives across Europe, and perhaps also a lack of awareness of some of the resources available to those interested in developing social outcome contracts. Final thing from me is just to say that at the Go Lab, we haven't ourselves done research specifically on social outcome contracts or SIBs in Europe. However, what we have done is we've been gathering a lot of data on projects across different states. Those are all included in our global impact bonds data set. And Mara has been a huge champion of the data set from the early days of the database. At the time, it was only including UK projects. we've been really fortunate to be able to work in partnership with lots of wonderful organizations to be able to update that data set. But Mara, perhaps I'll hand over to you to tell us more about the data set and what it tells us about the state of play with SOCs in Europe.
Thank you, Andrea. And can I thank you for the report about the state of play in Europe? We published this report as a product of the GoLab, but is mostly a product of Andrea and Anastasia. So thank you for bringing the report over the line. I recommend it to everybody. So what I wanted to mention this initiative, which is what I'm using this morning to describe what do we see in Europe based on our data set. But I want to say that this data set is called Indigo, which is an international network for data on impact and government outcomes. So the data set is one part of the initiative, which is the data, but it's much more than a data set. So we are steering a community of data enthusiasts with an interest in contracts that have a strong outcome focus. At the moment, we have all the impact bonds, but the plan for this initiative is to look at other form of contract, as long as having a strong outcome component is part of it. So what you see here is that if you go on our Indigo webpage, you will see a map with all the impact bonds we have information about. We have about 208 today. And on this website, you will find ways to interact with the community. We have some hack and learn, you have processes, we have data definition. You can upload your own data. You will see that data is very patchy. Everybody who tried to collect data, the Brookings Institution, social finance, many institutions are trying to collect this data. And if you do it based on what is in the public domain, you will realize that much of the information is missing. You have some information from some project, not for others, but at least it's a start. And with this initiative, we are trying to collate what is available. It's a live data set. So all we have is published, and we publish regular snapshot every month with some highlights of what it shows. We haven't done, as Andrea said, specific research on EU projects, but our data set has several EU projects. And I need to thank Juliana, who is keeping this live and up to date, and all the partners in Europe who volunteer information if we couldn't find it in the public domain. So I encourage you, go on the data set, see what is there. If you know of a project that is not there, signal it to us, and we will be very happy to make the information more complete. What we have now, information that we, for a European Union project, here is a quick snapshot. We see there are 49 projects that have been launched in the Union, and the capital raise is about 50 to 60 million euro, and the population that is expected to benefit from this project is about 140,000 people. To put it in, this is in context, this means that there is about, every project is worth over 1 million. They are larger than the project we see in the UK. In the UK, we have many more projects, but the total capital raise is not that bigger. So fewer projects in the European Union, but quite substantial, and there are a variety of type of investors, more varied than what we see in the UK. So there is a lot of experimentation in Europe. There are different ways to look at the data. You can look at who is leading in the European Union when it comes to social outcome contracts. And if you think about who is doing more projects, Portugal is leading, but there are different ways of looking at the data. And so if we look at who is raising more capital, Finland has raised 4 times as much capital and Portugal, although there are fewer projects. So you can cut the data and analyze it as you need. I want to draw also the attention on some very interesting infographics that we created. Here is a snapshot of a network diagram. We picked projects in Finland. So when you go on the data set, you can filter based on what you're interested in. Here are the Finnish projects, and there are 4 projects there. And so you have all the infographics based on your selection. This is a network that tells you who is doing what with whom in Finland, and you can hover over this network diagram if you are on the website, and live it will tell you what the point represents. The bigger the point, the more the connections in the network, and so more active is the player in the space. So I think definitely it's not complete. Each project doesn't have all the data. We don't need all the data to upload the project. So if you say, oh, I want to provide you some information, and you see the amount of information and the variables we are collecting, don't be intimidated. If you have any of those, we'll take it. If you have many gaps, it doesn't matter. There are many gaps, but we think that this project is a project we are doing with the community. So over time is an incremental improvement. So I just encourage you to go on the website, send us feedback if you don't understand things. Juliana is an absolute star and gem in taking on feedback and improving things. And if you are aware of projects that are not represented there, please do make us aware of them so that we can provide more information to other stakeholders like you. I'll stop here.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much both for that whirlwind tour. Did you want to add to that, Andrea?
Just one tiny thing to add after Mara's excellent presentation, which was I'm just really keen to make everyone aware of the fact that even though the GoLab hasn't published an awful lot on SIBs or SOCs in Europe, other than the guide that I've just mentioned, there is some emerging evidence from different countries on different projects, and lots of sources of information, some only in particular countries. So we've got a toolkit, for example, from Spain, same from France and so on, but just really to make people aware that if you're looking for information specifically, perhaps on your country, there might actually be other sources of information. A lot of these reports are included in the GoLab publications library. Perhaps, Laura, you can drop the link to the publications library. If you're always any time struggling to find information about the situation in your country, you can also just get in touch with us. So I'll stop there.
Great, thanks so much both for that overview and for that whirlwind tour of Europe. We did want to pause and take some questions now, and we have a couple of that have come through the chat. So if I could come to you first, Lorraine, and then Estella, please feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead.
Thanks, Tanya. I just wanted to ask how you measure success in the projects and the interventions across the different kind of countries and the different areas. Do you use a kind of a control area? Do you compare between countries, or is it just within the kind of the block as a whole? And do you kind of set baselines for the project? So in summary, how do you measure success, I suppose, is my question.
So who would like to take that? Mara, Andrea?
Lorraine, that's a big question. I guess one thing to clarify, it's kind of, do you mean success across EU, for example, kind of how successful the approach has been so far? I guess a lot of the information that we've been looking at or trying to gather is more on a project by project basis. And I guess, Mara, do chip in, but I feel like a very academic response would be that we would need to do more research to be able to answer a question of that magnitude. And the data is incomplete, as Mara explains, so I think that would be a key challenge. But maybe, Georgia, I don't know from the sort of European Commission perspective, how you're thinking about the impact that this approach or outcomes-based orientation more generally is having and how successful it is.
Yeah, for right now, for us, the facilities I mentioned, they support particular project, but every project is organized in their own way in terms of the impact metrics, the methodology, according to the intervention and the issue that it tackles. So it's really piecemeal, but what we hope to do in the future, especially as we get more thematic in our work, is to bring these things together and maybe have a more unified approach per topics. But that's all in the going forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to add that it's a very good question, and as I'm echoing part what Georgia is saying, the project by project. there are more or less sophisticated way to measure was this impact additional compared to what would have happened anyway. So some projects have a more robust way of measuring that than others. Often it depends on how large is the population you're managing. There are situations in which you can't have an actual like robust evaluation, or it might be too costly to do in particular circumstances, or the information might come in later on, so it's not embedded in the project. But some projects do have good evaluation strategies. But then there is a question on is it a success, or like is the use of this instrument, the social outcome contract, as a concept being successful? You need to compare it to, is it better than doing something similar with a traditional grant mechanism? Mm-hmm. And this is a very, very important question that we're trying to answer. And in part, the idea of creating a data set is to put the information in one place for research to happen. There are some qualitative piece of work. It's very difficult to come up with a counterfactual. We are doing some of those ourselves, but it's really, really challenging. But I agree, that's the big question. I think much like qualitative research at the moment that is like emerging funding, in what way people think this is more helpful, is what you find at the moment. And so it's based on interviews and people reflecting on the experience. That's still valuable, but the academic standard on the hierarchy of evidence, when you have randomized controlled trial on these approaches, is very, very difficult to create a control situation to assess. But many people are trying, and I'm sure in due course we will have an answer.
Thank you.
Mara, I know we need to move on to Bruno's presentation in a moment, but I saw an excellent question on the chat, and I'm just gonna make the most of the fact that we've both got the spotlight. There's a question from Estella around efforts to harmonize the different terms and definitions. And I know that's something we've been grappling with a lot at the Go Lab. So I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about how we might make progress on this.
You need to come to Indigo and be part of the community. So we think having a common definition is a starting point to compare. We started our work in collaboration with other players in the space, like the Brookings Institution, to make sure that we describe things as similarly as possible, and we can link up with other data sets. So this is not the only data set. There are lots of interesting data sets that report information on particular policy domain, on procurement practices. So we want to use definitions that allow us to cross-reference other work. If we don't do that, then it will be a small project. So if you are aware of particular source of information that you think we can work with, the definition is open. I will put in the chat where we have our data dictionary, so you can see what are the definitions that we are using. But as much as possible, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to take good practices that are already out there and adopt them.
Great, thanks so much, Sharon. I know, Estelle, you had another question as well, so do you want to unmute and quickly ask that as well?
Thank you so much. I'll try to be very concrete on my question. So I've seen that here in France, there's an initiative led by the ADN, which is the French agency for the ecological transition, to launch SIBs on environmental issues. So I was wondering if there are other examples as well in other countries that would try to use these contracts for environmental issues rather than purely social. Thank you.
Great. Anyone want to take that? Okay. Well,
I'm not sure whether the question was addressed to anyone in particular. So Estella, we've actually got a representative from France on the panel discussion a bit later on, so I'm sure she can share more. But the other thing I would say, just go on our database and do a little bit of exploration. We do have an option to sort of like check out projects based on the policy area. So that would be a good starting point.
Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, everyone. And so in the interest of time, we'll be moving on to the next part of the session, where we'll be passing things on to Bruno, who is the head of iCompass at the European Investment Bank. He will be taking us through some of the capacity building support that's available for people who are hoping to develop these social outcomes contracts. So over to you, Bruno.
Thank you, Tanya. Can you hear me well?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, fantastic. Good morning, everybody. So I guess we are all in agreement if I say that that social outcome contracting is about innovative financing mechanism. It's about social service procurement methods based on outcome rather than output. I guess we don't have to discuss this. Where it becomes interesting is that social outcome contracting offer opportunities for combining and directing private resources and public resources towards positive impact. It hasn't been said today, and probably this brings elements of answer. Wait, you're going rather fast. Okay, very good. That's good. That's good as a slide. So I was saying it was not already mentioned today, but the idea is that in SOC operation, the service provider compensation is linked to a measurable social impact rather than a specific set of tasks. And this is part of the how you measure success. So there should be some metrics which needs to be really measurable. And also I would like to bring to the table, well, representing a bank, if you are able to save money, if you're able to save public money, producing impact, this is also a way probably to measure success, although the focus should remain on the social positive impact. What is certainly interesting and attractive for us is that with the focus on monitoring and measuring social outcomes, social outcome contracting is also an effective way to tackle societal challenges, promoting alternatives outlook, other ways of financing social projects, other ways which are always considered in general as a cost and not as an investment with positive long-term socioeconomic returns. So now it is a fact, it was mentioned before, except the UK, very few countries make full use of social outcome contracting to address societal challenges and experiment in social innovation. And with a view to support these countries in developing out-based approach, the European Investment Advisory Hub, which is part of the Juncker plan, hosts the advisory platform for social outcome contracting, which is a joint initiative between the European Commission and the European Investment Bank Group. This is what Georgia mentioned before. This platform was launched in 2019, and the idea is to support the development and the use of social outcome contracting as an operational tool for delivering social impacts and innovation. We really hope, and Georgia briefly touched upon that, and we're looking with a certain optimism that there will be a continuation of this platform under InvestEU. I'm sure there will be good news pretty soon, hopefully in the coming weeks. Now, we can move to the next slide, yes. Different types of social outcome contracting pose specific challenges in terms of services provided to the target population, to the outcomes to be achieved, to the types of investors and service provider to involve, resulting in relatively vast range of advisory needs. So in this respect, the social outcome contracting advisory platform promotes a number of activities, and in particular, raising awareness and capacity building on the SOC approach, individual project development support, and I'll come to that maybe later, fostering peer-to-peer knowledge exchange amongst public sector officials which are undertaking, which are adventuring in social outcome contracting project, and of course developing guidance material which could be of interest for all stakeholders. So what was done? Let's move to the next slide. The first thing we did was to set up, to create a dedicated web page, and please note the address. This is what our first task. Then next slides, we tried to populate the web page with videos, with guidance material. One of them has been circulating in the last days on the social media and campaign related to this event. So that is the idea, really to raise awareness. Then next slide. We also worked a lot on the production of learning material, and you see the last production is the social outcome contracting in Europe. This is the contribution of GoLab. Thank you. Next slide. Very good. And the idea, I would say, and the ambition of the platform is not only to raise awareness and to create guidance material, but is also to help member states to mobilize, for example, resources from European Union, in particular, the resources managed by the European Investment Fund. Would that be EFSI or in the future InvestEU? The idea is to help member states to mobilize private resources, social impact investors. I understand that there is very limited knowledge in some cases from this side, and in this respect, we are very proud to have set up a partnership with the European Venture Philanthropy Association. And also what we aim is potentially in the future also mobilize other EU resources. Would that be European Social Fund Plus or the Asylum, Migration and Integration Fund, if this will be possible. The idea is not only so to mobilize resources, to canalize EU resources into social outcome contracting, but also to partner with specialists tapping on the experience of different organization and pocket of knowledge all over Europe. Hence our collaboration, not only with EVPA, which I mentioned, but also with GoLab. Thank you. Next slide. So all this very nice on paper, but what I've been doing, I just remind you that we started basically in January 2020, and a few weeks after confinement, so we were not very able to work and to meet. Nevertheless, we were able to put together a number or help a number of countries and member states and public authorities to adventure in SOC activities. So I would like to, among others, I'd like to remind that we're supporting the municipality of Madrid with a feasibility study for setting up a social impact bond on addressing homeless. The second one was the support to the Ministry of Lithuania, Ministry of Finance in Lithuania, with a feasibility study on a more broad approach, an integrated social innovation initiative, and of course, a pilot on social outcome contracting. We have also another pilot. The idea is to see whether or not there is a possibility to have multi-country SIB, at least for countries which have or are experiencing the same societal challenges. We'll see what will be the results of that. We are supporting the Ministry of Justice with a feasibility study for setting up a social impact bond in order to tackle the issues of reoffending rate of ex-convict. We are providing support to Slovenia, thanks to DG Reform, European Commission, which for the setting up of a social outcome contracting in Slovenia. We are supporting and this is the new acquisition in our portfolio, the Ireland, and in particular the managing authority, the ESF managing authority in Ireland, together with Rethink Ireland. I know that they are connected today, and we really hope to provide some support in order to have the first social outcome contracting in Ireland. The pipeline looks good. We have interest from Germany, from Romania, from Spain for new support. So what I would say, and this is the last slide, and my sale pitch for today. So if you're a public authority and you would like to get support from the social outcome contracting platform, please have a look at the website and get in touch through our website. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Bruno, for sharing all of that. I don't see any particular questions on the chat, but just a very quick one from me. So as you were talking through some of those developments recently, all of them seem to have happened during the last few months, so during COVID-19. Has there been any sort of particular impact of the pandemic on how that support is being lent out? So are there some particular things you might have changed, added, or changed, subtracted as a result?
Well, the answer is very easy. 1 year ago, it was not, the problems which are emerging and deriving by the pandemic was not a societal issue. Now it is. So one of the recurrent themes that we see is that we would like to do something in order to take care or bring back to labor certain vulnerable categories which have lost because of the pandemic, which have lost jobs, which are in a situation which they were not maybe 12 months ago. And this is, I would say, an emerging and recurrent theme in a number of cases that we are exposed to.
Great, that's very helpful. Thanks so much, Bruno. So I think we'll be moving on to the panel discussion now, which will indeed be the bulk of the remaining session. So I'll be passing things on to Andrea for that. Over to you, Andrea.
Great, awesome. Thank you so much, Tanya, and huge thanks, Bruno, for that amazing presentation. If you've joined Engaging with Evidence sessions before, you'll know that we love to keep these sessions quite interactive. And we have an absolutely brilliant lineup of speakers for the next part of the session, which will run as an open discussion. Huge thanks to all the panelists joining us, and thank you for waiting so patiently until now to join the discussion. I'll give you each a chance to introduce yourselves in a second, but before I do that, just to say that today's discussion we thought would sort of focus it on three core themes. One thing that we want to hear from our panelists is around the drivers and motivations for using social outcome contracts in their respective countries or cities or sort of geographies that they're representing. We also want to hear from them sort of concrete examples of innovations and adaptations that they've seen at local level. And finally, towards the end of the session, I'm going to ask each one of them to just share sort of key consideration, top tip that they have to share with you all around the practical implementation of a social outcome contract. So without further ado, I'll invite each of the speakers to briefly introduce themselves. As you introduce yourself, please could you also give us a quick overview of the state of play with social outcome contracts in your country. And with that in mind, I'll go to Mathilde first. And maybe Tanya, maybe you can help us spotlight Mathilde so we can see her on the screen. Great, thanks.
Hello everyone, can you hear me?
We can.
Great. So my name is Mathilde Pelizari. I'm working at Impact Invest Lab in France. So Impact Invest Lab is a non-profit organization dedicated to the development of impact investing. It acts also at the Secretariat of the French National Advisory Board on Impact Investment and to the development of social impact bonds. So we are working with social providers and now with the government to develop impact bonds in the French context. So we call them now impact contracts. We used to call them social impact contracts, but as Estela mentioned, we now have a focus on environment too. So just impact contracts. So part of our mission is to stay informed and reflexive on the topics. So we disseminate as much information as possible and we conduct academic research. And I'm part of this because I am a PhD candidate in my third year. I focus on social impact bonds from an approach labeled Science and Technology Studies. And this approach aims to unveil the roles of technologies in our society. So here we talk about a complex economic, financial, legal, and policy technology, which is impact bonds. And besides the French case, I have studied SIBs in Colombia and in Chile. So in France, we have 10 projects running, all coming from Call for Proposals, which was launched in 2016. We have more than 13 million euros invested in those 10 projects. We have very different topics as all come from the Call for Proposals. It's really each social organization which applied with its own program. So we have very different things, mostly on employment, various approach to favor employment for vulnerable populations. We also have education. We have rehabilitation of facilities too. And yeah, mainly the SIBs are mainly set up with the central government, but we also have 2 impact bonds with local authorities and 2 with a public agency.
Hey, thank you so much, Mathilde. And we'll hear more concrete examples from France in a minute. But before we do that, Philippe, can I briefly ask you to introduce yourself and just tell us a few words about social impact bonds in Portugal?
Of course. Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to join these good friends and share our experience and once again learn from yours. As Andrea presented, my name is Filipe Almeida and I'm president of Portugal Social Innovation, which is a Portuguese government initiative created back in 2014 with 2 main objectives. First, to promote social innovation and social entrepreneurship. Second, to develop the social investment market in Portugal. And to do so, we mobilized European structural funds in a pioneering program and created 4 financing instruments aligned with the life cycle of a social innovation project and addressing the specific needs of the projects and trying to use its potential as well to solve social problems. So we have under this public initiative 4 different instruments. One of them is the Social Impact Bonds program. In that program, we act as the outcome payer with the resources of the European structural funds, namely the European Social Fund, and we contract measurable social outcomes with investors and service providers. We also bring into play public organizations that validate the indicators and the goals, and hopefully they will follow up the projects. So to this date, we have launched 5 calls on social impact bonds. We approved 15 social impact bonds of around 4.5 million euros. But a quick and important update, we are just about in the next few days to approve 5 more social impact bonds, in this case in digital inclusion, of around 5 million euros, which bring us to, I believe that it's my expectation that by the end of the program, we will have around 21 social impact bonds in Portugal of around 10 million euros. So that's it for now.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Filipe. And from Portugal, we go to Finland. And Mika has been leading a lot of the work around social outcome contracts in Finland. So Mika, we're delighted to have you. Do you want to briefly introduce yourself and then just give us a snapshot of the state of play in Finland?
Kiitos, thank you. Hyvää huomenta, hyvää iltapäivää, good morning, good afternoon in English. So my name is Mika Pyykkä and I have been working with this issue about 6 or 7 years, and nowadays I'm working as a director of the Center of Expertise for Impact Investing. And the story behind the center, and maybe I can say first that the main task of our center as a part of the Finnish government is to support and help our public sector, which means our central government, as well as our about 300 municipalities, to implement and develop further the idea of outcomes contracting. So our main task is really to help our public sector in terms of outcomes contracting and implement that idea. And this story started about 2014 when Finnish Innovation Fund Sitra started its impact investing development activities. And at that time, we talked very carefully what would be the way to implement the idea of impact investing in the Nordic welfare state like Finland, how we can really measure the additional value coming from private capital in the society like we have. And then we recognize that maybe the SIP model is the way how we can really prove the additional value and then combine the public money, the very strong public sector, to the private capital and private innovations. And so we started to focus on social impact bond model as an instrument to implement the idea of impact investing. And we wanted to do that because we have a sustainable gap in our government's budget. There's a lot of economic problems at the local level. We are struggling with our social and healthcare system. And one of the reasons that the situation is like that we are talking about proactive and preventive actions very much, but we are implementing nothing, almost nothing in terms of that. So we recognize that maybe the social impact bond is the tool to make that kind of change. And then we really understood that, okay, now we have a tool with which we can implement the idea of proactive and preventive measures. And then after a couple of years, we first recognized that, no, we are not talking only about SIPs and proactive preventive action. We are talking about systemic change. We are talking about outcomes contracting, which means that we really challenge the way how taxpayers' money is used and how our society works. So maybe, I don't know if that is enough at this stage, but we are really focused on our public sector understanding what should be changed and how outcomes contracting can be used as a tool to make that kind of systemic change in our society. Thank you.
That's incredibly helpful. Thank you, Mika. And up next, we have Ruben from Social Finance Netherlands. Ruben, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone, and great. And thank you so much for organizing this this session. My name is Ruben Koekoek, Managing Director, Social Finance NL. And before that, I worked for 9 years at ABN AMRO Bank. And in 2013, we created the first social impact bond in the Netherlands with the municipality of Rotterdam. And then we tried to scale up the model to other parts of the Netherlands. And that resulted in impact bonds with other municipalities, the Ministry of Justice, an absentee insurance company, and also into the first outcome fund together with the province of Brabant. Social Finance NL is there to help organizations measure, finance, and scale up their impact. Social outcome contracts are an important tool for that. It's not a goal in itself, but it is an important tool for systematic change. And at Social Finance NL, we focus both on advising important players in the social finance field, being an intermediary for public-private deals like social outcome contracts, and we share knowledge to all different parties in order to create a social finance ecosystem in the Netherlands. And on the slide, you can see some of the social outcome contracts which are realized in the Netherlands. Two characteristics. One is very decentralized, and that is nice because it's really very close to the target group, and we know the target group quite well because we work together with a lot of municipalities. But there's also a danger, but I will elaborate on that later. And second, it's really focused on the labor market, and it's really our ambition to see how to expand this product to the rest of the social sector, and maybe also to environmental issues like Estella pointed out earlier. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Ruben. I It's my pleasure to introduce our final panelist for this morning, Laura from the Spanish National Advisory Board. Welcome to the session, Laura.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for inviting me. I'm Laura Blanco, and I'm the Director of Knowledge and Outreach for the Spanish National Advisory Board for Impact Investment. And what we've been working on is basically trying to set and spread knowledge about social outcomes contracts in Spain, because there was a need for that. There were some initiatives going on for a number of years with different regional governments, but none of them had come to fruition. And we wanted to started sort of like a co-creation approach, working with not only commissioners or the intermediaries that were pushing the market, were taking the lead actually in showing commissioners, the tool, but also include the social service providers who had been left out of the picture. And we thought it was important that everyone had this view of the other party's understanding and perception of the tool. So we put together a group of people, about 25 people in all parts of the ecosystem. So we had administrations, we had public service providers, we had some investors, and then we also have the intermediaries and some other experts and lawyers, etc. And we launched a task force in January last year. We were working for 12 months on understanding what were the main issues for everyone, and trying to build some confidence and trust in the tool. And we put together we prepared this toolkit. There's actually not a lot of literature in Spanish, and it wasn't very practical anyways. And we decided to compile and make it very practical, and do kind of like a selection of things that could help all these people to understand what was a social outcomes contract about, and finding some experience that had that were in Spain that were not social impact contracts, as we call it, but were payment by results contracts, but were helpful because they were showing that this kind of mechanism can work to produce impact, and also were giving us some keys to understand what needed to happen for these mechanisms to really work. And you can find that in the toolkit. And also we will be presenting the work on the task force and the conclusions in June 16th in an event that we're going to be doing. I'll talk about later. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, and feel free to drop in the chat the link to the event if it's public. Thank you so much, the lovely panelists, for the introduction and the very helpful overviews. We've got about 25 minutes together for an open discussion. We're really keen to get your questions. And I see just some really great discussions on the chat as well, people volunteering, information, highlighting different projects in the data set that we host. If you have questions for any of our panelists, please drop them in the chat. We want this time to be as helpful as possible for you. And it's really great to have perspective from 5 different countries and from 5 quite different organizations. We've got government perspectives, but also intermediaries, evaluator/researcher, and Laura kind of from the investment perspective. So hopefully we'll have a good discussion. Felipe, I wanted to come to you first because Portugal has been one of the first countries outside the UK to experiment with impact bonds. So the first pilot was launched in 2015. You now have a whole national strategy. I'm just really curious what some of the learning has been. Have any of the initial assumption around the reasons why outcome-based contracting might be a helpful to have any of those assumptions changed?
Well, so let's get back quickly to 2014. One of the, in line with what Mika was saying about Finland, actually back in 2014, one of the main underlying ideas behind the creation of Portugal Social Innovation and the social impact bonds within Portugal Social Innovation was the recognition that the government and the public administration would never have the competencies or the resources enough to deal effectively with all the social problems and social challenges that we face. And that this was an opportunity with European structural funds to experiment a new way of creating partnerships with civil society, with social organizations, with investors, so we could develop better solutions and inspire the evolution of public policy. So that was one of the main drivers back when we started this initiative in Portugal. Of course, that concerning the social impact bonds, that was also a possibility. The idea concerning specifically the social impact bonds program, the idea was to create an instrument where we could also bring into the partnership these public organizations that are responsible for implementing public policy with no financial fluxes. They have no financial commitment, but they are partners in this instrument. So, and the idea was to persuade them to start shifting from an output-focused policy to a more outcome-oriented public policy strategy. So they could learn how to do it. We are using structural funds. We act as outcome payers, but the public entities that hopefully will be the future outcome payers are there with us. So in our model, the solution is not enough to be efficient. It has to be innovative because we are talking about social innovation. The application must be done in partnerships between investor, service provider, and the public organization that validates the project and indicators. The value of the SIB is based on a draft budget. That's how we do it today. And we also created in the national tax policy a tax relief of 30% for all the investment in social impact bonds, despite any reimbursements in the future, in order to attract private investors as well. So this is the basic framework we're working with. And as I said, we have already 15 social impact bonds in this sense, and a lot of challenges as well.
Great, thank you so much, Felipe. Mika, I would like to come to you next. Felipe has mentioned the engagement with local administrations. I know you've been doing a lot of work in Finland to engage local government to improve their capacity to do outcomes-based contracting. And I also saw a great question in the chat around the sort of any efforts to address the risk of social washing, which to some extent I would link to sort of the like capacity building agenda and ensuring we're designing really robust approaches. So can you share any insights from the Finnish experience around capacity building, and also this tricky question around how do you address the risk of social washing?
No, I can't. It was a stupid Finnish joke. No,
please try. And actually, I think Finland is a great example because you're doing, as far as I know, quite robust evaluation. So it'll be really good to hear about some of that. So I know, measuring the kind of outcomes achieved, but also separately conducting the evaluation of impact.
Yeah, of course. I try to be as brave as possible, but I want to start by reminding us that I think that the localization is one of the key elements, because we can of course learn each other and change experiences, but local circumstances and local culture, local market is a very crucial thing, which is then guiding us to do something and how we do that. And when we started our work with social impact bond model, I personally met 50% of Finnish mayors. So we have about, as I mentioned, 300 municipalities in Finland, and I met 150 mayors in order to ask them what is needed there at the local level. And then we find out that we have some joint, or they have some joint approaches, what they would like to do by using new kind of approach. And after that, we were able to create some kind of process. It was some kind of process how we can design and prepare social impact bonds from those perspectives. And as you may know, and a lot of you know already, that we are talking about modeling of societal benefits. We call that process with that name. And the process means that we are calculating and calculating all possible euros. We are using all possible register data in order to create that kind of understanding at what is the status quo and what can be achieved by changing the method of how we are working. But at the same time, we are using co-creation as a tool to really create that kind of joint understanding. And based that kind of process, we are very sure that we are able also to create that kind of indicators, how we can then later measure if we are successful in terms of what we are doing, and are we really achieving those goals which we have set when we start to do something in terms of social fund. So I don't know if I answered your question, but this was very briefly that kind of different perspective which we try to combine when we are preparing and designing our outcomes contracting projects.
Yeah, that is very helpful. Thank you so much, Mika. And can I just ask all panelists, because we won't have time to come to each one of you for each question, but if you do have sort of like burning comments, if you can multitask, do post your responses also directly in the chat. Thanks so much, Mika. So I saw one interesting question around the involvement of sort of like the community itself in social outcome contracts, and then examples of sort of like crowdfunding being used to finance social impact bonds. So Ruben, I feel really grateful to have you on the panel, because I know this is one of the things we talked about. So do you want to tell us more about this particular new project that you've been working on in the Netherlands?
Yeah, I think you mean our health impact bond to prevent fall incidents on seniors. So we work on that, like as in a lot of countries, people get older and older, and mostly after a fall incident, people are not independent anymore. So it's really important to prevent that. But as in many health systems, there's not enough. There are not enough resources for prevention, because the savings of those preventive measures are scattered among different stakeholders. So we ask all those stakeholders to be part of one social outcome contract, and we committed 6 municipalities in the southern part of the Netherlands, together with the national government and the main health insurance companies in that region, to commit to one social outcome contract. And hopefully this summer we will launch our deal with 3 investors, several service providers who all are committed to do a full prevention training for 2,500 seniors. And one of those investors, and that's probably why you asked the question, is a crowdfunder. So we give civilians in the region also the possibility to chip in. So that's, I think, great to democratize the tool. But as important as that is that it also brings transparency to the table, because we have to be open about the contracts to hundreds and hundreds of investors. So it will be open for everyone. And I think that's good for the Indigo database, but it's good for the market as well. It's a bit scary, but I'm really looking forward to use crowdfunding in this deal. So we're working hard on the contract, and hopefully in the coming months we can share more information.
Very exciting, and we look forward to linking up on the data on our data set. So I saw a very interesting question around transparency, and you've mentioned that, Ruben, as well. So let's come back to that in a second. But while we're talking about innovative projects, Matteo, can I come to you next? It'd just be great to have more of an overview of the different projects in the UK, particularly with this new call for projects that the French government launched. And then just to warn all the panelists, I would love to get everyone's thoughts on this question around transaction costs. Someone's raised that in the chat, unsurprisingly, something that keeps coming up. But over to you first, Matteo.
Yeah, thank you. So indeed, really a specificity, I would say, in France is to launch SIBs with call for proposals. So to be clear, it means that the vehicle for the outcome payer to pay is the subsidy. So a call for proposal really aims to raise bottom-up innovation really from ground workers, from social workers. So they are invited to apply with their own initiatives. And so we have three new calls for proposals running. We have 27 million euros committed by the Agency for the Ecological Transition that Estela mentioned before on the topic of circular economy, and 8 programs were selected on really diverse topics: ecological efficiency in nurseries, for example, turning surplus food into food aid, or reusing construction materials, etc. We also have 10 million euros committed by the department for the social and solidarity economy on the topic of equality of economic opportunities. And we have 10 million euros committed by the Ministry of Employment on inclusive employment. This one is still running. So in keeping with the first wave of impact bonds, these calls encourage bottom-up innovation. The metrics will be negotiated on each program. This is quite huge transaction costs, but this is really, this is not going to change, I think, because the idea is really to test innovative approaches. So you cannot standardize metrics for this kind of objectives. And there are some novelties with these three calls for proposals. Policy areas are predefined. It was not the case before. Money is committed before launching the calls. This was not the case back in 2016 also. And we have a template of contract which is available, which aims to simplify a lot all the legal work. And it seems that there will be a greater attention to the robustness of evaluation, but it depends on many different things. So the impact bonds that will be set up will confirm that, hopefully.
Great, thanks, Matteo. So while I have you here, this question about transaction costs, you've mentioned the template contract. So how much of an issue has it been in France? And then Mika, maybe you can share a little bit about whether this is a significant consideration in Finland. And then lastly, on the point about transaction costs, Laura, I'd love to know whether in the roadmap that you've developed with the task force, whether there are any particular ideas about how to avoid some of these issues around transaction costs. So Matteo, then Mika, then Laura.
Yeah. Well, it was an issue for everyone who got involved in social impact bonds. Social providers had to be part of the negotiation for 1 year, sometimes 2 years or even more, and they needed to have the cash to do so. All the intermediaries, investors, outcomes payers. The French model is really collaborative, so everyone committed to negotiate the contracts, doing a lot of pro bono work, like free work. And it was not possible to imagine that this tool could be scaled up with these huge transaction costs. So the government actually gathered a group of practitioners back in 2019 to reflect on the idea of simplifying the contracts. So this group of practitioners produced a template of contracts, and the idea was to scale it up.
Great, thank you so much, Matteo. Mika, any reflections from Finland on the question of transaction costs?
I wouldn't like to talk about transaction cost at all, because what we are talking then, of course, I understand what we mean when we are talking about transaction cost, but compared to those costs which we are facing at the moment, because our government is not doing well, those costs are very tiny. You know, for example, in Finland, our 6 biggest municipalities, or our municipalities altogether, are paying altogether about 1.6 billion euros per year, because there are so many children in custody care, placed outside their own homes. I think that is huge costs. And then if we are doing some designing work, some preparing work in order to prevent that kind of things happening in families, I wouldn't talk about transaction cost. Again, I understand what you mean when you are talking about transaction cost, but somehow when we really want to change the society and compare to what we are losing at the moment in terms of taxpayers' money, those costs are nothing. Thank you.
Great, excellent. That's an important point, Mika. Ruben, do you want to chip in? Is there a hand up or?
Yeah, because it depends on how you see that transaction cost. First, to measure well is expensive, but as Mika points out, to not measure is more expensive because of the social cost. Measuring is not something you only have to do for social outcome contracts. You have to do it if you want to solve a social issue. So that are not costs related to a SIP, but the costs related to proper governmental interventions. Then it's good to look, you have to look or at the deal. And if you compare the deal size to the transaction cost, then a lot of times it's way out of line. So, but it depends if you only look at the deal or if you want to create systematic change, if you want to gain knowledge on a social issue, then you can explain why it costs more compared to the deal size, but it's better for the society as a whole. And third, and that Mathilde really pointed out well, that sometimes it takes 2 years to develop a deal and you need all those people involved, but not for every stage you need all the parties. And in my opinion, the outcome payer needs to be involved from the start. The intermediary needs to be involved very soon. The service provider can go in a later stage. You first need to know what you want to achieve, and then you're going to see who can help you achieve those goals. So the service provider comes in later, in my opinion, and the investor can also comes in later, because you first need to know what you want to achieve, how you're going to measure the goals, and then you can properly negotiate with investors and come to a deal. But in my opinion, it's better when you did your homework before the private parties come in. So it's more efficient, but you're also stronger as an outcome payer. You can negotiate better because you're prepared.
Yeah, I think this is an excellent point around the sort of like cost of measurement and cost of data. I guess from our side at the GoLab, we've been trying to use some of the data in our data set to sort of see if we can unpick the question about transaction costs. And I think for me, there's also an issue of what do we actually mean by transaction costs, right? So what are the different types of activities? And as a research institution, I'm sure we'll be the first one to say that it's really worth investing in a robust evaluation and better data collection. And perhaps, Mara, I'll come to you in a second for reflections on this question around transaction costs and the link to transparency, because we had a couple of questions around that. Laura, it'd be great to hear what the Spain NAB is thinking in terms of maybe reducing some of these transaction costs if we think we should, or maybe we're happy to accept that this is an important part or additional cost linked to more robust measurement.
Yeah, so for us, that was one of the key points, not that much transaction cost, but what Ruben was saying about preparation, doing a lot of work launching the initiative for two reasons. One of them was that there were no experiences in Spain, and some of the municipalities were very wary about the legal fitting of these tools that were completely new into the current existing public procurement law. And it wasn't the people that are running the front services, the social services in the administration, because those were the leaders that were trying to push social innovation and wanted to experiment with the tool. It was more like the other parts of the administration, the technicians and the controllers, that were not comfortable with the whole idea. And it was clear that there should be buy-in from all the divisions in the administration for the SIP to launch. And so it was an issue about who pays for the feasibility study, because these feasibility studies needed to be very wide in scope. So they could cover not only the social intervention, which is the typical thing a feasibility study would do, but also the legal structuring and the financial structuring. So, and that amounts to, I would say it could be 150,000 euros or over. And the problem is not, I don't think that's that much money, to be honest, for a municipality budget. But the problem is that you need to launch a procurement process. And that takes up to 9 months. So the administration felt like, okay, if we do this, we will never launch a seed in our political cycle. So we can do this. And that's, and it was difficult to find sponsors that could pay for that. So, and you know, within the administration, there are other procedures that they could be used, but the controllers did not feel comfortable using them because they like to do things in a certain way, and they're very wary of trying new things, even if they're legal, because they don't want to be under public scrutiny, and especially with something that is completely new. So it was very helpful to find the advice we have from the European Investment Bank, because they offered to pay for the feasibility study, and they understand that, you know, it needs to be comprehensive, and they are supporting that. So we think that with the first one done, it would be much easier, and it would set a precedent for the rest of administration. So it should be less costly.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. I've just realized what the time is. So we only have about 3 minutes left together. So we'll hear from Mara first with her reflections from the government outcomes lab perspective on these questions around transaction costs and transparency. Felipe, I would then love to come to you as well to hear kind of what the Portuguese experience has been, you know, kind of over the past 6 years. Is it getting easier and quicker to develop social impact bonds? I did say to all our panelists that I will ask them to each share one key takeaway, because we're almost out of time. I'd just like to invite them to drop their one, you know, top tip words of wisdom directly in the chat for everyone to see. And just before we wrap up the session, I just want to say a huge thanks to Juliana, who's our data steward. She's really been the custodian and the energy behind the Indigo data set. So huge thanks, Juliana. And I know you've answered lots of the questions in the chat today. Clearly, you're probably the most knowledgeable person within the Go Lab in terms of individual projects. And thank you so much for all the work on the data set and on the introductory guide on SOX in Europe. And with that, Mara, we'll come to you, and then to Felipe, and then we'll probably have to say goodbye.
I'll try to be super brief because of time. I just want to say that I think we need to distinguish two things. One is transparency in order to reduce the transaction costs. And there are open contracting data standards that are available that we can use, and we need to raise the awareness. And so we should have information to, like, redacted version of contracts, non-commercially sensitive things, templates for feasibility studies. Those are not commercially sensitive, and we should make them more available. Especially when we talk about an ecosystem that wants to make a positive difference, we want to learn. The narrative is a narrative of learning and transparency. So I think there shouldn't be as many challenges to have more transparency to reduce the transaction cost ex ante. I take the point that sharing information on performance is difficult, is politically difficult. Even if you look at our data set, if you look at the performance information, is really, really patchy because it can be abused, you can point fingers, and some project can be blamed for not delivering, where if you only measure input and invoices, it seems that you've been successful because you've been disbursing. So on publishing performance is a change of attitude, is more difficult. But some performance is better than not knowing anything about performance. But on reducing transaction costs, we should do it.
I've asked you a big question and given you 30 seconds. Felipe, you get the last word. So any final reflections from the Portuguese experience?
Well, I would highlight that it's very important, in line with what Mika was saying, it's very important to have a team on the ground that works with municipalities, with entrepreneurs, and try to understand where are the problems and which are the urgencies that have to be addressed in this kind of contracts. And if you want to engage at the central and local government officers, if you want to engage them, you have to find the champions. You have to present them with evidence of impact. You have to show them how this kind of contracts can help to achieve local development goals. and offer capacity building, because it's very important to offer capacity building to these public administrators in the central government or in the local government. And as I said, have a team on the ground that follow this on. We do that.
Excellent, great. Thank you so much, Philippe, and huge thanks to all our wonderful panelists. Thank you, Bruno. Thank you, Georgia, for joining us. And finally, just a huge thanks to everyone in the audience. Thank you for being so engaged, for asking so many questions, sharing information about your own work in the chat. Thanks, everyone, and do stay in touch with the Go Lab. Do check out our database, and do let us know if you start working on a new project. We'd love to know. But thank you all, and have a lovely rest of your day. Bye.
Bye everyone. Bye.